The Viking longship surged through the frothy waters, its dark silhouette cutting through the gray morning mist. Ragnar, his broad shoulders wrapped in a fur cloak, stood at the prow of the ship, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He could feel the rush of anticipation in his chest, the promise of glory calling him to the shores of Skjoldheim. The wind tugged at his hair, and the rhythmic sound of oars slicing through the sea filled his ears. Behind him, his warriors were preparing, sharpening their weapons, tightening their armor, readying themselves for the raid ahead. "The gods are with us," Ragnar muttered, his deep voice carrying across the deck. "We'll take what's ours by blood and fire." His men grinned, their faces lit with excitement, eager for the battle that awaited. The longship moved steadily toward its destination, the roar of the approaching storm in the distance, adding to the tension of the moment. Ragnar knew that this raid would mark a new chapter in their saga, a chapter written in blood. As the longship approached the shores of Skjoldheim, the sound of the approaching storm filled the air. Ragnar stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the coastline for any signs of movement. The small village, nestled between towering cliffs, seemed peaceful, unaware of the Viking force bearing down upon it. "Tonight we feast," Ragnar said, his voice like a growl, as his men rallied to his side. "The gods have smiled upon us. Skjoldheim will fall." His warriors cheered, their axes and shields clanging in anticipation. The ship continued to slice through the choppy waters, drawing closer to the shore. Ragnar's heart beat in time with the ship's rhythmic motion. The winds picked up, and the mists surrounding the coastline began to thicken. His warriors, clad in fur and iron, prepared themselves for the inevitable clash. As they neared the shore, Ragnar raised his hand to signal the attack. "Prepare for glory," he shouted. The longship reached the shores of Skjoldheim as the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds. Ragnar's heart raced as his warriors jumped ashore, their boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The village was quiet, unaware of the impending chaos. Ragnar led his crew, their battle cries echoing through the still morning air. His axe was already in his hand, gleaming in the early light. "For Odin!" Ragnar roared, charging toward the village gates. His men followed, their shields raised high as they prepared for the fight that was about to unfold. The gates of Skjoldheim opened just as Ragnar reached them, revealing the enemy soldiers lined up in defense. They looked hesitant, unprepared for the ferocity of the Viking assault. Ragnar's eyes gleamed with triumph. "They may try to stand against us, but they will fall like the rest," he muttered, raising his axe. The battle was about to begin. The clash of steel echoed through the village as Ragnar and his warriors stormed the gates. The enemy soldiers, caught off guard by the ferocity of the Viking assault, stumbled backward, their shields raised weakly. Ragnar's axe swung through the air with lethal precision, cutting down the first enemy soldier that crossed his path. "Push forward," Ragnar shouted to his men. His voice was a command, and his warriors responded, their battle cries filling the air. The village, once peaceful, was now a battleground. Smoke began to rise as the houses were set aflame, and the sounds of battle drowned out all else. Ragnar fought with brutal efficiency, cutting through enemies like a whirlwind of fury. His warriors followed, pushing deeper into the village, their axes and swords flashing in the sunlight. No one could stop the Viking rage. Skjoldheim would be theirs by the end of the day. As the battle raged on, Ragnar and his warriors pushed deeper into the heart of Skjoldheim. The enemy soldiers, though brave, were quickly overwhelmed by the Viking assault. Ragnar's eyes scanned the chaos, looking for the village leader. "Find their chief," he barked to his men, his voice cutting through the clamor of battle. "I want him alive. We'll bring him before our gods." His warriors scattered through the village, searching for the leader while Ragnar continued to carve a path through the enemy. The village was nearly theirs, but Ragnar wanted to secure the ultimate victory. The enemy chief, a tall man with a fearsome reputation, appeared suddenly from behind a barricade. He brandished a massive sword, challenging Ragnar to a duel. Ragnar met his challenge without hesitation, his axe held high. The two leaders clashed in the center of the village, their weapons ringing out with every blow. Ragnar's strength and ferocity were unmatched, and with a final swing, he disarmed the enemy chief. "You fight well," Ragnar said, his voice low. "But it's over." With the enemy chief defeated and Skjoldheim now under Ragnar's control, the Viking warriors stood victorious. Ragnar, his axe still stained with the blood of his enemies, surveyed the destruction around him. The village was in ruins, its homes reduced to smoldering ashes. The sky above was thick with the scent of smoke, and the last remnants of the storm began to fade away. "This is what our gods demand," Ragnar muttered to himself, his voice heavy with both pride and sorrow. As his warriors looted the village, Ragnar walked to the center of the burning settlement. He knelt before the corpse of the fallen chief, offering a silent prayer to Odin. "Your spirit will join the great halls of Valhalla," he whispered. The sounds of victory, of triumph, rang in his ears, but deep down, Ragnar knew this was only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead. The raid had been successful, but their journey had just begun. Their name would echo through the ages. As the victorious Vikings began to pillage the village, Ragnar's thoughts turned to the next step in their campaign. They had successfully conquered Skjoldheim, but there were more lands to raid, more glory to claim. The sound of clashing swords and the crackling of fires filled the air, but Ragnar was deep in thought, planning his next move. "We must push north," Ragnar said to his trusted lieutenant, Haldor, who had just returned from scouting the area. "The Jotunheim coast lies beyond the mountains. It is there we will find our next conquest." Haldor nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "The Jotunheim lands are known for their fierce warriors, Ragnar. It will not be easy." Ragnar smiled grimly. "The fiercest enemies make the best challenges. We will show them the strength of our might." With that, Ragnar called his warriors together to discuss their next raid. The longship was already being prepared for the next journey, and the crew was eager to follow their leader to greater glory. As Ragnar and his warriors sailed toward the Jotunheim coast, the atmosphere on the longship was one of anticipation. The weather had cleared, and the calm sea was a welcome change from the rough waters they had navigated earlier. The ship's oarsmen worked in unison, their muscles straining against the water as they propelled the vessel forward. Ragnar stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the dark outline of Jotunheim's cliffs could be seen rising from the sea. "We are close," Ragnar said, his voice low. "The land of giants awaits." His warriors, though battle-hardened, looked to Ragnar with a mix of respect and excitement. They had heard the tales of the fearsome warriors of Jotunheim, but none had yet faced them in battle. "Let us see what they're made of," Ragnar continued, a grin spreading across his face. "We will make our mark on this land, just as we have with Skjoldheim, and we will not stop until the gods are pleased with our bloodshed." As the long ship approached the Jotunheim coastline, the tension was palpable. The warriors grew silent, their gazes fixed on the land ahead. The cliffs rose steeply from the sea, and the shore was lined with jagged rocks. Ragnar's voice broke the silence. "Prepare yourselves," he said, his tone serious. "We may be in their lands, but we are Vikings. We take what we want, by force or by fire." The ship began to slow as they approached the shore, and the crew began to ready their weapons. Ragnar's heart beat faster as he surveyed the land ahead. The Jotunheim coast was infamous for its fierce defenders, but Ragnar knew they would not back down. As the ship came within striking distance of the rocky beach, Ragnar's eyes narrowed. "We land, we fight, and we conquer," he said with finality. The warriors raised their shields and prepared to charge, their battle cries echoing through the air. The gods would look favorably on this raid. The battle on the Jotunheim shore was brutal. The giants who lived in this land were as fierce as their reputation had suggested, towering over the Viking warriors. But Ragnar and his men fought with the fury of Odin's chosen. Ragnar himself was a whirlwind of violence, his axe cleaving through the enemy with terrifying precision. "For Odin," Ragnar bellowed, his voice rising above the chaos of battle. The Jotunheim warriors roared back, swinging massive weapons with unmatched strength. But Ragnar's Vikings were no less formidable. They fought with the rage of 1,000 storms, cutting down any giant who dared to face them. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in favor of the Vikings. The giants, though strong, were overwhelmed by the sheer number and ferocity of Ragnar's men. The ground was littered with the fallen, both Viking and giant, as Ragnar's warriors pushed forward. Victory was within their grasp. With the giants of Jotunheim defeated, Ragnar stood among his warriors, surveying the battlefield. The bloodied shore was littered with the bodies of fallen giants and Vikings alike, but the victory was undeniable. The warriors cheered, raising their weapons in triumph. Ragnar's eyes scanned the horizon, a fierce gleam in them. "This is the start of something much greater," he said, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "The gods have tested us, and we have shown them our strength, but our journey doesn't end here." Ragnar turned toward his lieutenant, Halldor, who had been a steady companion throughout the battle. "The next raid will be the most legendary yet. We head south to the lands of the Saxons. They will remember our name." The wind picked up, sending the sounds of the celebration across the battlefield. Ragnar's warriors gathered around him, their faces filled with pride and anticipation. They were ready for whatever lay ahead. As Ragnar and his warriors sailed south toward Saxon lands, the mood on the ship was different. There was an air of quiet determination among the crew, each man aware of the challenge that awaited them. The Saxons were known for their fortitude in battle, and Ragnar's men knew that this raid would test them like never before. Ragnar stood at the ship's prow, gazing out over the calm waters. "The Saxons may be formidable," he said to Halldor, who stood beside him, "but they are not invincible. We will make them fear us. We will take their lands, their riches, and leave only our mark." Halldor nodded. "And what of the Saxon king?" he asked. Ragnar's lips curled into a grin. "The king will fall like all the rest. His kingdom will be ours to conquer." The longship moved steadily through the water, its crew ready for the storm that would come when they reached the Saxon shore. The Saxon coast came into view as the longship drew closer. Ragnar could see the small Saxon village nestled along the shoreline, unaware of the approaching threat. "We strike before they know we're here," Ragnar instructed his warriors. "We'll take them by surprise and crush them before they can even prepare for battle." His men nodded, their weapons at the ready, their faces hard with determination. As the longship glided silently through the waters, Ragnar's heart beat faster. He could already hear the sounds of battle in his mind, the clash of steel, the roar of warriors. As they reached the beach, Ragnar raised his hand, signaling his warriors to disembark. The ship's anchor was dropped, and Ragnar led the charge onto the shore, his axe raised high. The Saxon villagers looked up, their faces filled with shock and fear. But it was too late. The Vikings had come, and they were unstoppable. The battle erupted almost immediately, as Ragnar and his warriors stormed the Saxon village. The Saxons, though caught off guard, fought fiercely to defend their land. Ragnar's men clashed with the villagers, their axes swinging and shields raised. Ragnar's movements were fluid and brutal, his axe cutting through the air with deadly precision. He cleaved through one Saxon warrior, then another, pushing forward toward the center of the village. "For Odin!" Ragnar shouted as he drove his axe into the chest of a Saxon defender. The Saxons, though outnumbered, fought with determination, but they were no match for the Viking fury. Ragnar's warriors tore through the village, setting homes ablaze and taking what they could carry. The once quiet Saxon village was now a battlefield, and Ragnar's warriors were claiming it as their own. As the sun began to set over the Saxon village, Ragnar stood at the top of a small hill, surveying the destruction. The village was in ruins, its people either killed or captured. Ragnar's warriors were looting what they could, gathering the spoils of their victory. "Another village, another triumph," Ragnar said to Halldor, his voice filled with both pride and satisfaction. Halldor nodded, wiping the blood from his sword. "But the Saxon king will not be pleased," he said. Ragnar's smile widened. "Let him come. We will meet him on the battlefield, and we will make him regret ever standing against us." As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Ragnar turned to his men. "We sail again at dawn," he said. "There are more lands to conquer, more glory to claim. Our saga is far from over." The warriors cheered, their voices rising in unison, ready for the next battle. As Ragnar and his warriors prepared to set sail once again, the mood was different. They had raided and conquered countless villages, but the Saxon lands were vast, and their king was said to be a formidable opponent. Ragnar stood on the deck of the longship, watching as the crew made their final preparations. The wind was picking up, and the sea was beginning to show signs of restlessness. "This next raid," Ragnar said, turning to Halldor, who was beside him, "will be the most difficult yet. The Saxons will not let us take their lands without a fight. Their king will be waiting for us, and he will send his best warriors to stop us." Halldor nodded, his face grim. "But we've faced worse," he said. "The Saxons may be fierce, but we are Vikings. We fight for glory, for Odin, and for our ancestors." Ragnar smiled, the fire of battle burning in his eyes. "And we will leave no one standing in our wake. This raid will be legendary." As the longship sailed toward the heart of Saxon territory, the crew was on edge. The looming presence of the Saxon king weighed heavily on them. The king had gathered a great army, and his warriors were known to be some of the fiercest in all of the British Isles. Ragnar knew this raid would not be easy, but he also knew that victory would cement his legacy as one of the greatest Viking chieftains in history. "Tonight we fight for the gods," Ragnar said, his voice carrying across the deck. "We fight not just for riches and glory, but for the honor of our ancestors, for the memory of those who have come before us, and for the promise of a future where the name Ragnar Lothbrok is spoken with fear and respect." His men nodded in agreement, their faces set in grim determination. The longship sailed through the night, the crew readying themselves for the battle that awaited them at dawn. At dawn, the longship reached the Saxon shores, the waves crashing violently against the rocky beach. Ragnar's warriors stood ready, their eyes filled with the same fire that burned in their leader's heart. "We raid now, and we take what is ours," Ragnar declared, his voice steady but fierce. "We will show the Saxons the price of defiance. Their king will fall, and his kingdom will belong to us." The warriors cheered, their battle cries rising in unison. Ragnar raised his axe high, the blade gleaming in the first light of day. "For Odin!" he shouted. The crew leaped into action, rushing toward the shore, their shields and swords raised. The Saxons, who had been waiting for them, met the Viking assault with a fierce resistance. But Ragnar's warriors were unstoppable. The clash of steel filled the air as the two forces collided, the battle for Saxon lands beginning in earnest. The battle on the Saxon shore was fierce, but Ragnar and his warriors pressed forward, cutting through the enemy like a tide of steel. The Saxons fought valiantly, but they were outmatched by the Viking fury. Ragnar's eyes searched the battlefield for the Saxon king, the one man who could turn the tide of battle. "Where is their king?" Ragnar shouted to his men. "We need him alive. We want him to see his kingdom fall." His warriors spread out, searching for the Saxon king amid the chaos of battle. Ragnar fought his way through the enemy ranks, his axe cleaving through shields and armor alike. He could feel the end of the battle drawing near, but his focus was singular. He needed the Saxon king alive. The king was the symbol of their defeat, and Ragnar wanted to see his face when he realized that his kingdom was lost. The Saxons, broken and battered, began to retreat, but Ragnar's warriors were relentless. At the heart of the battle, Ragnar finally spotted the Saxon king. The king, a tall man with a crown of iron and a cloak of crimson, fought bravely against Ragnar's warriors. Ragnar's eyes narrowed as he pushed forward, cutting through the remaining Saxon defenders. When he reached the king, the two warriors locked eyes. "Your kingdom is no more," Ragnar said, his voice cold and commanding. "You will either die here, or you will live to see your people kneel before me." The Saxon king sneered. "You think you have won? The Saxons will never bow to you." With a roar he lunged at Ragnar, but Ragnar was faster. In a single fluid motion, Ragnar disarmed the king and brought his axe down, knocking him to his knees. "Surrender," Ragnar commanded. The king, defeated and bloodied, looked up at Ragnar with a mixture of hatred and fear. "I yield," he whispered. "Your victory is complete." Ragnar raised his axe in triumph, signaling his warriors to cease their assault. The Saxon king had been defeated, and their conquest of Saxon lands was now complete. The Saxon king, now imprisoned and bound, was paraded before Ragnar's warriors, who had gathered in a large clearing near the battlefield. The men were weary from the fight, but their spirits were high. The spoils of war were rich, and they had achieved victory once again. Ragnar stood at the front, his presence commanding as ever. "Look at this man," Ragnar said, raising his hand toward the defeated Saxon king. "Once he ruled a kingdom, and now he kneels before us. Let this be a reminder of our strength." The Saxon king's eyes burned with anger, but he said nothing, his pride shattered. Ragnar's warriors laughed and jeered, but Ragnar remained solemn. "The battle is won, but the war is not over. We move north, to the lands of the Picts. They will learn to fear our name." Ragnar turned to Halldor, who stood by his side. "We leave at dawn," Ragnar continued. "Prepare the men, the next conquest awaits." The longship sailed northward, leaving the smoldering ruins of the Saxon kingdom behind. The journey was long, but Ragnar's warriors were resolute, their eyes fixed on the next conquest. The Pictish lands were known for their savage warriors, but Ragnar knew no fear. "We will take their lands just as we have taken the Saxons," Ragnar said, standing at the ship's helm as the crew rowed in unison. "And when we return, we will have riches and glory beyond our wildest dreams." Halldor nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The Picts are a different breed, Ragnar. They fight with the fury of beasts." Ragnar's face hardened. "Good," he said, his voice low. "I will show them what it means to challenge a Viking." The ship cut through the sea, the crew ready for the battle that would await them on the shores of the Pictish lands. As the longship neared the Pictish coastline, the atmosphere grew tense. The warriors were quiet, their weapons ready, and their eyes locked on the land ahead. Ragnar stood at the prow, his gaze focused on the cliffs that loomed over the shoreline. "Prepare yourselves," Ragnar said, his voice carrying over the ship. "The Picts are fierce, but we are Vikings, and no man, no beast, no army will stand in our way." His words were met with a chorus of approval from his warriors, their faces grim but resolute. The ship slowed as they neared the shore, and Ragnar raised his hand, signaling for the crew to ready their weapons. The longship's anchor was dropped, and Ragnar, followed by his warriors, leapt onto the rocky shore. The Pictish defenders appeared, emerging from the trees with fierce war cries. Ragnar grinned, raising his axe. "Let the gods decide who is worthy of this land," he shouted, charging forward with his warriors. The battle on the Pictish shore was brutal. The Picts fought with unmatched savagery, their war cries echoing through the air. Ragnar clashed with their leader, a massive warrior with a battle-axe as large as any man. The two titans locked eyes, their weapons clashing with thunderous force. Ragnar's muscles strained as he parried the Picts' blows, his axe slicing through the air. "You are strong," Ragnar grunted, his eyes blazing with intensity. "But you are no match for a Viking." With a roar, Ragnar pushed forward, knocking the Pictish warrior off balance. He drove his axe into the warrior's chest, sending the leader crashing to the ground. "The rest of you will fall, just as he did," Ragnar shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. The Picts, now leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat, but Ragnar's warriors were relentless. They cut down any who dared to flee, securing the Pictish lands for the Vikings. With the Pictish leaders slain and the remaining defenders scattered, Ragnar stood at the center of the battlefield, victorious once again. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the bloodied shore. "This land is ours now," Ragnar declared, his voice strong. "The Picts will never rise against us again." His warriors cheered, their voices rising in a victorious chorus. Ragnar looked over his men, his heart swelling with pride. "We have proven ourselves worthy of Odin's favor. Let us take our spoils and prepare for the next raid." Halldor approached, wiping the blood from his sword. "The Saxons and Picts have fallen, Ragnar, What now? Ragnar's eyes gleamed with excitement. Now we set our sights on the kingdoms to the south. We'll raid their lands and we'll leave them trembling in fear. Our saga is just beginning. The warriors gathered around Ragnar, their spirits high, ready for the challenges that awaited them. With the Pictish lands now under their control, Ragnar's warriors sailed back to the heart of Viking territory. The journey was long, but the mood was one of celebration. The crew sang songs of victory, their voices carrying over the waves. Ragnar stood at the helm, his gaze focused on the horizon. The wind tugged at his cloak, and the sea mist wrapped around the ship like a blanket. "We've earned our rest," Ragnar said to Halldor, who stood beside him. "But only for a short while. There are more lands to raid, more kingdoms to conquer." Halldor nodded, wiping the salt from his brow. "The Saxons are not the only ones to fear us. The Franks and the Gauls have heard of our victories. They will be next." Ragnar's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Let them come," he said. "We will show them the might of the Vikings. The gods are with us, and they will see our strength in battle." As the longship sailed home, Ragnar could already taste the glory of the next raid. Upon reaching Viking territory, Ragnar and his warriors were greeted as heroes. The town was alive with excitement, and the people gathered to welcome their victorious warriors. The sound of horns filled the air as Ragnar's longship was pulled ashore. Ragnar stepped off the ship, his axe at his side, his face stoic. "The gods have smiled upon us," he said, raising his axe high. "We have conquered, and we will continue to conquer. The Viking name will echo across the lands." The villagers cheered, their voices rising in unison. Ragnar's warriors followed him into the town, their faces proud and eager to enjoy the fruits of their victory. The feasts were plentiful, the ale flowing freely, but Ragnar remained focused. He knew that the victory was just the beginning. He needed to plan the next raid, for the Viking people were not ones to sit idly by. "Rest for now," he said to his men, "but prepare for what comes next. Our saga is far from over." The celebration continued through the night, but Ragnar could not forget the weight of the next raid. As the firelight flickered across the faces of his warriors, Ragnar felt the familiar pull of destiny. He had claimed the Pictish lands, and now the Saxons and Franks were next. He knew that the time for feasting and rest would soon be over. He sought out Halldor once more, who was sitting quietly by the fire. "We've come far, but the true test lies ahead," Ragnar said, his voice steady. "The Franks and the Gauls will not surrender their lands easily. They are strong, and their armies are vast." Halldor looked up at his leader, his face thoughtful. "But they have not faced us. They have not faced you, Ragnar." Ragnar nodded. "No, they have not. And they will learn what it means to stand in our way." As the flames danced in the night, Ragnar made a silent vow. No matter the odds, he would lead his people to greater glory. The next day, Ragnar gathered his warriors to discuss their next move. The air was thick with tension as he stood before his men. "We've raided the Saxons, the Picts, and now the Franks are our next target," Ragnar said, his voice powerful and filled with authority. "We will sail to the heart of their kingdom, take their riches, and show them the true strength of the Vikings." His warriors cheered, their spirits high as the prospect of another raid loomed before them. Ragnar's eyes gleamed with excitement, but he knew the Franks would not be easily defeated. "Their king is powerful, and his army is vast," Ragnar continued. "But we are Vikings. We fight for honor, for glory, and for the gods. No army, no king will stop us." The warriors raised their shields and weapons, their battle cries filling the air. Ragnar felt the fire of their determination. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The next great raid would be theirs, and the Franks would fall before them. As Ragnar and his warriors set sail for the lands of the Franks, the mood on the longship was one of excitement. The ship sliced through the water as the crew worked together, their synchronized effort propelling the vessel forward. Ragnar stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the horizon. He could see the faint outline of the Frankish coast, and he could feel the weight of what was to come. "We raid before dawn," Ragnar said to Halldor, who stood beside him. "We will surprise them, take them by force, and leave nothing but ashes in our wake. Halder nodded, his face grim. The Franks are powerful, Ragnar, but they do not have the will to fight us. Ragnar smiled, his teeth bared. They will soon learn what it means to face a Viking. The longship moved steadily toward its destination, and Ragnar's heart beat with anticipation. The battle would be fierce, but the victory would be theirs. As Ragnar and his warriors neared the Frankish coast, the mood was electric with anticipation. The battle with the Franks would be a test of everything the Vikings had fought for, and Ragnar knew that their name would be cemented in history if they emerged victorious. The longship glided toward the shore, and Ragnar's warriors stood ready, their weapons sharpened, their armor gleaming in the early morning light. "This is it," Ragnar said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "We've faced the Saxons, the Picts, and now the Franks. Their king may think his army is unbeatable, but he has never faced the fury of the Vikings." Aldor, standing beside Ragnar, nodded in agreement. "They will fear us," he said. "The gods have been with us in every battle. They will not abandon us now." Ragnar looked toward the shore. "Let us bring their kingdom to its knees," he declared, his voice loud enough for the entire crew to hear. The warriors roared in agreement, and the longship moved steadily closer to the Frankish coast. As the longship reached the shore, Ragnar's warriors disembarked with practiced precision. The Frankish defenders, though initially surprised, quickly rallied, drawing their swords and shields to meet the Viking assault. Ragnar led the charge, his axe raised high as he stormed the beach. "For Odin," he shouted, his voice carrying over the clash of steel. His men followed, their war cries echoing in the air as they surged forward to meet the Frankish soldiers. The battle was brutal from the moment it began. The Frankish soldiers fought fiercely, their armor glinting in the sunlight, but the Viking warriors were relentless, their battle-hardened instincts driving them forward. Ragnar fought his way through the enemy ranks, his axe cutting through shields and flesh alike. The sound of clashing steel and the cries of warriors filled the air as the two forces collided with unrelenting force. Ragnar's warriors pushed forward, determined to break through the Frankish defenses. As the battle raged on, Ragnar pushed deeper into the heart of the Frankish defense, cutting down any who stood in his path. His axe swung with deadly precision, cleaving through enemy soldiers like they were made of straw. He was unstoppable, a force of nature. But the Frankish king was still out there, commanding his army from a distant hilltop. Ragnar knew that if he could defeat the king, the battle would be won. "Halldor!" Ragnar shouted, his voice carrying through the chaos. "Find their king. I will finish this." Halldor nodded and disappeared into the fray, his sword flashing as he cut through the enemies. Ragnar, meanwhile, continued his relentless assault, taking down soldiers one after another. His warriors fought with him, their axes and swords cutting through the Frankish defenses. The Frankish soldiers began to retreat, but Ragnar's men were unrelenting, pressing forward with the ferocity of a storm. At last Ragnar found the Frankish king. The two warriors stood facing each other, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. The Frankish king, a tall man with a golden crown, raised his sword and charged at Ragnar, but Ragnar was faster. With a swift motion, he parried the king's blow and delivered a brutal strike to the king's side. The Frankish king staggered back, blood streaming down his armor. "You fight well," Ragnar said, his voice low. "But it is over." The Frankish king, gasping for breath, raised his sword one last time, but Ragnar was already upon him. With a final swing of his axe, Ragnar brought the Frankish king to his knees, his sword falling from his grip. Ragnar stood over the defeated king, breathing heavily. "Your kingdom is ours," he said. The Frankish king, his pride broken, lowered his head in surrender. With the Frankish king defeated, Ragnar turned to his warriors. The battle was over, and the Frankish kingdom was theirs. Ragnar raised his axe high, his voice ringing across the battlefield. "We have conquered once again," he shouted. "We have proven that no king, no army can stand against the might of the Vikings." The warriors cheered, their voices rising in unison. The sound of victory echoed across the land as Ragnar's warriors celebrated their triumph. But Ragnar's mind was already focused on the future. "This land is ours now," he said. "We will rule it, and we will claim more lands, more glory, and more riches." The saga of the Vikings is far from over. Ragnar's warriors gathered around him, their faces filled with respect and admiration. They had followed him through countless battles, and now they stood victorious, ready to take whatever the world had to offer. Ragnar smiled, his heart swelling with pride. The Viking Age had begun, and their legacy would be eternal.